Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Brighton Music Club. We are the offshoot of the Brighton Film Club, which you can find on Instagram and online as well. Give us a follow, go and have a look at our movie reviews and other bits and pieces. We are still doing Isolation Inspiration, which is a recommended series over on Instagram where we talk about light-hearted and fun movies and TV shows to watch in these strange times. This is Underrated Albums, and this is the final episode of our first series of this. It's been really fun to do. Really appreciate the love and support you guys have shown with these videos. Thank you for watching, thank you for commenting, liking, subscribing and all of that sort of stuff. Certainly going to do another series of these, but we thought we'd do something different in the meantime and then come back to the underrated albums. This is episode 10, just to make clear. This is not sort of done in any order or any ranking, ascending or descending, anything along those lines at all, just kind of separate records that we wanted to talk about. As we've explained before, it's the opposite of classic albums. We talk a little bit about an album which is underrated in our opinion. We're not trying to be contentious or upset the apple cart necessarily. We're not trying to put something as better than something else, not at all. Just want to inspire debate, have a little bit of fun, give you guys something to go and have a listen to as well, and maybe hear something with a fresh ear. And it's always good to talk about something which doesn't get spoken of necessarily, although this episode is certainly a slight departure from that norm, shall we say. Either way, we love music here at the Brighton Music Club. I do as well. Hopefully if you're listening you do too, and that is why you're here listening to me, and that is what we want to talk about. We want to share music with you, want to push it, we want to talk about what we like and what we love. I'm sure you guys want to do the same, so give us a comment, all of that other sort of stuff. What's been most interesting to talk about, I feel, and listen to in our search, myself and the other guys here at Brighton Music Club, is the parameters of being underrated. Spoke about it a little bit in the Nalufa Yanya video, which was episode 9, why stuff is underrated and whether there is a level of underrated, whether we can all agree on certain parameters. And I think we probably can't, and that's what's really interesting about this. And certainly if anyone has different opinions, I want to certainly hear those and pick those up as well. We feel we've kind of got our set criteria down for something that's underrated, whether it's overlooked commercially or critically, or whether it's just faded, or whether it just doesn't get the love it did or deserves. And it's really interesting to talk about those parameters. As an example, Miss Universe, again, episode 9, Nalufa Yanya, didn't chart at all. We feel needs to be pushed and spoken of and listened to, because it's a fantastic album that didn't get the commercial approval to meet the critical approval. Today, we're going complete opposite of that, and we're talking about an album that is many times platinum and sold 4.5 million copies. So, you know, that's what's really interesting about underrated albums, and that's why you can't put in any sort of list. It's not about that. It's not about ranking stuff. It's not about changing people's minds necessarily. It's not about pushing stuff on you that you don't like. It's just about talking about stuff we do and that we feel is underrated and sparking that debate. And hopefully, as I say, go and have a listen to these records and listen to the whole series so far. Episode 10, saving a contentious one for last. Today we're talking about Reputation by Taylor Swift. Can an album that has sold 4.5 million copies, can an album that has a Netflix-funded live concert tour footage that's again been watched millions and millions of times, can an album that was spoken of everywhere in the world when it came out in 2017, can that particular record be underrated? I think yes. I want to talk about that and talk about why. You may disagree, and that's absolutely what we're here to do, is spark that debate. This is why I think Reputation is an underrated album. So again, throughout this whole series, we've talked about stuff being a listening experience. You know, there are cultural reasons behind why albums are significant and not. There are other impactful and environmental reasons why records might get overlooked, or this, that and the other. We're talking straight listening experiences, and that's why what I don't want to do in this video is go too deep into the feuds and the other stuff and the past records and comparing it to all of that sort of stuff. I'm talking as a straight listening experience, and this is an absolutely marvellous piece of work. Now, interestingly, it didn't necessarily do critically really well. There's certainly been a real embrace of pop by the bigger critical institutions over the last, probably I'd say 10 years or so, talking particularly Pitchfork over in the States, which is sort of the music Bible, really well revered and appreciated. And here on these shores, the NME, again, that's probably our UK equivalent. And there's been a real embrace of pop music, and that's a really good thing as people move beyond that sort of tribalness of genres and into that sort of sea of genre agnostic people. And that's really, really good. It's broadened everyone's horizons. It means different artists get different people interested in them. It means more obscure stuff can get into the charts, and it means more chart stuff can get into so-called music heads, and it won't just be written off completely. And we're seeing a little bit of a departure of that more traditional, stale, horrible pop, sort of the boy band stuff, the kind of manufactured Westlifes and the One Directions of the world. That's kind of disappearing, and we've got these really interesting, idiosyncratic, unique individuals in the pop landscape now. And that's a really amazing thing. I think it's brought about a real fresh outlook to music generally. I think it's caused loads of influence, and it's just been amazing to see. Just take a look at the Glastonbury headliners of the past, however long, and you're talking about people like Beyonce and Kanye West and Jay-Z as well, and how these artists and how this embrace of different types of music by different people. And it's really interesting, and we've got this amazing list. We spoke about it in the Bleachers video, which is obviously very important to Taylor Swift as well, but Lana Del Rey's and Lorde and Taylor Swift, and it's Grimes and all these other sort of really interesting artists. And it's fantastic for the pop landscape, and it's a real challenge. Now people need to keep up with them, and the indie bands need to do that, and the dance and hip hop and everything. And there's no, as I say, there's no boundaries anymore. Look at Billie Eilish, look at Drake, artists that would have been pigeonholed before and are now the biggest artists in the world. And I think that's a really fantastic thing. And I think Reputation is, again, one of the sort of really big reasons behind that. And as I said, I don't want to talk about the previous records. I know Reputation differs a lot to them. Myself, this was my first sort of entryway, I guess, into Taylor Swift. So I understand people who had that past of liking her early stuff and being a bit more of a hardcore fan. Obviously, I'm British as well, so I'm not necessarily an expert on the early releases. Certainly not. And I'm not going to put this necessarily above those or talk about rankings or anything along those lines. I don't want to do that. And I can understand why people would have maybe been turned off or at the very least surprised by what she came out with here. But I think now we can look at it back in hindsight and think that, wow, what a piece of work this is. Again, sort of listening experience. It comes down to my theory of, if someone else released this album, what would people think of it? Yes, it got the attention. Yes, it has that aspect of the everything that was going on at the time. You can see that in the music videos, and you can see that in the really good Netflix documentary. And I just pointed at my TV as if you knew that was there. Miss Americana, which does a really good job explaining some of the situations surrounding this album's release. But you don't need to know that listening to this. It's maximal, huge, bulletproof pop hooks and galore for miles, and it actually still really stands up. As I said, I do understand how that maximalism can turn people off, especially some of the fans from the earlier days, and I don't think the album helps itself with the way that she released it, and I understand why it was done, but obviously now looking back, people go, oh, well, Look What You Made Me Do was the lead single. That obviously was a really brave decision, a contentious decision as well. I personally really like that single, but I know that there's a big line. It really divides people like Marmite. Also, I think with the album itself, I think it starts really well with Ready For It, but I think it was a mistake personally to put Endgame as the second tune. I think this album's all about Swift herself and her lyrics and her opinions and her being this sort of caricature villain character, which is really interesting. And I think going straight in with a song with those features, with Future and Ed Sheeran, I don't think that works. I think it's the weakest track because of that. And I think that may have halted the flow. And again, looking back, and when people think of it in their minds, that's why it may still be underrated, because people will think of these certain things that went around it. But let's kind of scrub that off and move forward. There is a complete lack of guitars. There is that aspect of adding in the auto-tune. There is the difference with her previous storytelling vocals, where here there's not that. I get all of that stuff, and I get why that makes a difference to the early records. But again, it comes back to, if this was released by another artist, it's absolutely bulletproof. The production is unbelievable. The hooks are incredible. And lyrically, I do think it's really good as well. I know it lacks the storytelling aspect, but I think it's punchy. She really plays that villain character really well. Those sort of spoken word asides, like in Look What You Made Me Do, are absolutely to die for. And I think, really interesting, it doesn't sound dated. I think because there's so much vitriol and bite, and she was so in a dark place, which is obviously not a good thing, it just meant that, get alluded to the title, the reputation aspect didn't matter to her at all. And it gave her a new perspective, and it doesn't bow to trends at all. It doesn't copy anything else. Certainly wants to be in your face. It wants to be loud, and there's no aspect of watering it down. There's no sort of lean towards, we need to make this sound like this or make it be a pop chorus. As I said, the lead single, that's all you need to know about the fact that this is sort of an anti-pop record, despite being a massive pop and commercial success. And I think that's really important, really interesting, that an album like this, which is so distinct, still had the success that it did. I think that is its own reputation. It's really textural. It's actually not really a dance record either, which I think is really interesting. It's got those huge synths and those huge drops, but it's not something that you'd expect necessarily to hear on a club dance floor. It's really interesting all the way through. It really doesn't sound dated at all. It still sounds futuristic. It still sounds fresh, and there's still some really cool and important touchstones as well. Listen to something like Don't Blame Me. That sort of sums that up. It doesn't sound like a dance floor single, despite the sort of big synth sounds on there, the big production on it as well. Then you've got, as I said, the cooler touchstones, the more sort of indie, hipster music of choice, something that Pitchfork would like. We've got something like Getaway Car, which really does take that Bleachers, Jack Antonoff sound to its sort of full potential. We spoke about Bleachers a lot in that episode, so I won't go too much into Jack Antonoff, but obviously we think the world of him here as a producer. And Dancing with Our Hands Tied, which sounds a lot like Flume, that really cool producer. Dare I say it as well, there's a lot of that Yeezus sound. There's a bit of an aspect of that to it as well. I know there's stories about whether that was a deliberate move, and whether there is or whether there's not, and whether there was an influence and whether there's not. And as I said, I don't want to go into that particular feud, because we could be here all day, and I appreciate I've probably already gone sort of over my normal amount of talking for this video. But again, Yeezus, one of the albums of the decade, due to its lack of putting on a face. It was just straight in your face, and this is exactly the same for me. Lyrically, it's really biting. It's a bit of a loosening of the shackles. It was really brave, and I feel that some of the sort of one-liners in this are really, really good. And as I said, those spoken word bits are just absolutely amazing. And it's one of those things, I think people's careers have different phases. As I've said, in terms of personal life, which Miss Americana talks about very well, the sort of background behind it, obviously not so good. And, great that you can hear with Lover that clearly Swift is in a better place now. But I think you look back on this now, and I argue that this is a better record than Lover. I think you've got that darker side to it. You've got that villainy. It really sounds distinct in her career, and you can put that into phase. You don't need to listen to the full albums. You can go, well, yeah, I like a couple of songs from here, which are just like amazing. And we like that personally, that sort of more brave side, and that's why I think this is really an important record. I really do think it's one of the albums of the decade. In terms of culturally, absolutely everyone was talking about it. Commercially, because of how many records it sold, and the sort of influence that it's had, the background behind it, as I've said already, but most importantly, and what the whole point of this series has been about, in sound. As a listening experience, it's absolutely optimal all the way through. The supposed weaker songs we really like, but there's some absolutely incredible work on here as well, which stand up with anything that she's got in her career. It is a marvellous piece of work. Even in that documentary, when she found out that she got no Grammy nominations and then said, "I need to make a better record," I don't agree with that at all. I think this is a marvellous album. Really go and have another listen to it and remove yourself from the time, remove yourself of whatever you may think of Swift generally. Take those preconceptions aside. Let's pretend it's made by someone else. Not that that would be possible with everything surrounding it, but try and listen to it with those fresh ears. Try and listen to it as a pop experience. And I think it just needs to be reappraised, looked at differently as an artist, as a sound. It's a brilliant record, and that is why Reputation is our underrated album number 10. Thank you so much for having to listen to me. Sorry it's gone on a little bit longer than my other videos so far in this series. It's been really great doing this series and really lovely to talk to you. Really happy that it's been myself from the Brighton Music Club to speak to you about these records, which means so much to us generally. Give us your thoughts. We're still taking your opinions and thoughts on different albums to do, because there will be, as I said, another series of underrated albums. We'll even revisit some of these artists as well, so there's no list or anything along those lines. It's just albums that we like and feel that are underrated and want to talk about. Keep them coming. As I said, we might do a Q&A, so any questions, please fire them over to us. We might do albums of the decade. Is probably going to be the next video that we do, and just try and do a few more fresh things and different ideas. Thanks so much for the love and support shown so far. Really appreciate that. Go and give us a follow on Instagram. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Stay safe. Happy listening. Go and listen to Reputation. Goodbye.